Julia and Michael were walking to school together. They always met at the bus stop on 34th Street. They went to a private school called Immaculate Conception. Julia and Michael shared no classes together, except for one, religion. Julia and Michael were walking to school together. They always met at the bus stop on 34th Street. They went to a private school called Immaculate Conception. Julia and Michael shared no classes together, except for one, religion. They hated religion. The teacher was horrible. Her name was Miss Miranda Bruce. Miranda had knotted brown frizzy hair and bright green eyes. Julia was made fun of a lot. People would tell her she looked like a first grader because of her height. And Miss Bruce would too. Michael always hated how they treated Julia. She didn't deserve it. Julia was a nice girl. One day, Julia and Michael were waiting for the bus when something magical happened. It started to snow. It was beautiful white, soft snow falling on top of them. Once they got on the bus, everyone was looking outside and loving it. They wanted one more magical thing to happen. School being closed down for the day because of the first day of snow. But it wasn't going to happen. Soon, they were in the front of the gate when the bell rang to come in. Julia and Michael were disappointed. Julia had sport first period. Michael had music first period. Of course, second period was religion. Michael always waited for Julia so they can go in together. But Julia never arrived. Michael waited and waited, even after class. But she never ended up in front of that door, or even anywhere else. The truth was, Julia never came back to school, or the next day. Michael thought that Julia went home sick, but that wasn't the case either. The real reason she wasn't at school was that it was her birthday. Julia's birthday wasn't like any other birthday. The thing about Julia is that she can breathe like a fish and she lives underwater in a ship. In Julia's world, you have to take 2 days off from school or work when it's your birthday. So that's what she did. Her mom said for her birthday present, she could tell everything to Michael, but only if his family agreed that he can become a fish person. But if his family didn't approve, Julia could never see or talk to Michael again. This was a risky choice for Julia. It's either never tell Michael and his family approves, or tell Michael and lose her best friend forever. The next day at school, Julia was about to tell Michael everything, until she saw, from the corner of her eye, Miss Bruce spying on her. Julia was always suspicious of Miss Bruce. After school, when Julia was walking home, she wished she had told Michael, but something wasn't right every time she tried to. Michael never knew where Julia lived, so after school, Michael followed her home, and nothing went good from there. Michael always knew how Julia went to school, but he never knew how and where she went home. So he thought the only way to find out the truth was to follow her. At one point, after Michael had been following Julia for 20 minutes already, Julia ran rapidly into the forest. Michael dropped his bag and ran after her. Just after that, Julia realized someone was following her, so she yelled, "Boys!" All of a sudden, this group of men, maybe 7 of them, blocked Michael from going anywhere. Julia kept running into the forest. The men stood there until Julia was far into the forest. After that, Michael went home and wondered why she ran into the forest and why she screamed for that group of men who came so quickly. He made notes and drew pictures of what the men looked like and which directions Julia went. The next day, Michael wasn't at school. He was sick. Not really. After Michael's parents and sister left for the house for work and school, he went to the same forest as yesterday. He took all of his notes and drawings to help him. Once he figured out the direction Julia went and moved there, he found himself at a gigantic river. There was no way to get around it, only to swim over it, or to bring a boat. Michael traced his steps back to the beginning of the forest to see if there was any sight of a boat or a canoe, but there was nothing there. Once he got back to the river, he needed to see if the river was short enough to swim across, and if he had enough time to go back home and get his swim trunks. Michael just had enough time, but he had to hurry. Michael ran all the way home to get his swim trunks. Michael was a bit scared because he's an 8-year-old boy going into the forest alone in the middle of the day when crazy people could be outside, like that group of men. Speaking of them, Michael ran into them again at the bank of the river. This time, Michael asked them why they were there and who they were. The men said they were here to help Julia, and they were Julia's safe group. Michael seemed very confused about all of this madness. Michael asked if Julia was home and where she lived. The group said yes, she is home, but they can't reveal where she lives. That knowledge is only for family or for those who know the news of her life story. Michael asked, "What news of her life story? Is it good or bad? Do I know already?" The group said it includes water. Michael thought it was maybe the time when they were kids that Julia found out she could only drink water because everything else gives her rashes. But why would she need a safe group for that? It couldn't have been the real reason. Michael asked if they could just tell him. So the group said he had a promise not to tell a single soul. Once Michael heard the story, he was completely speechless. The next day at school, Michael had to tell Julia that he knew. So very bravely, that is what he did. He did it during religion. Julia didn't talk to Michael for the rest of the day. She didn't talk to anyone. After school, Julia made the decision that she had to ask Michael about becoming one like her. Once Julia asked Michael, he said he was okay with it, but his parents might not be. Michael asked how he would become one of Julia's kind. He wasn't born that way, and no one else in his family was like that. Julia gave it some thought and said she'll ask her mother about it. On purpose, Michael didn't ask his parents about it. Julia's mother also gave it some thought and said Michael doesn't have to become one of them. He can stay the way he is and still hang out with Julia, but he can't tell anyone. Since Michael knows when Julia's birthday is and he can still hang out with Julia, he thought of throwing her a birthday party. Michael invited the safe group, Julia's mother, and her family. At that birthday, Julia and Michael started to become a little more than just friends. And Julia's safe group also became Michael's. Of course, everyone still hated Miss Bruce.